Thank you, Bruno. Let me present the case of Jordan, actually. The title of my talk is Jordan's Nuclear Energy Strategy Meeting Domestic Challenges. Indeed, as I've mentioned in my introduction today, we are really facing an energy crisis. And even with the LNG terminal, we are still importing 97% of our energy from outside. So the energy situation here is precarious because any disturbance in your supply chain, whether, for example, in the case of Egyptian gas, we had these frequent attacks on the gas pipeline. In the case of Iraq, we had the disruption on the oil route from Iraq. Now we are happy, we are living with the LNG terminal, but still most of the energy sources are now coming from LNG, as I've mentioned just a few minutes ago. And who knows, something might happen to the ship, fire, then we are in a bad shape. So we are going for a comprehensive energy mix, basically pushing forward solar and wind. The government has given all the incentives, tax incentives, private sector, public sector, land for free to get wind projects and solar on the ground. Moving to oil shale, the government has signed an agreement with a consortium composed of Estonian, Malaysian, and Chinese companies to produce electricity through direct burning of oil shale. The agreement goes for producing 450 megawatts of electricity from oil shale, expected to be operational by 2020. And then, if the experiment is successful, to move ahead, and indeed, to pursue nuclear. So there is a growing energy demand in the country, both in terms of electricity demand, which is growing at 6% per annum every year, and desalination. I have mentioned yesterday about Jordan being the poorest country, and maybe tomorrow you will hear from Mr. Qutaishat and Her Excellency Maysouni Zobi about the difficult situation we have here in water, and the country sooner or later has to move to desalination. Actually, one of the reasons why Jordan was pursuing the Dead Sea, Red Sea project is to build a big desalination complex south of the Dead Sea on the south shores. And the plan was to produce 800 million cubic meters per annum and pump it to Amman, the capital, and Zarqa, the biggest city near to Amman. So there is a big demand for energy, not just in terms of the natural growth in electricity, but also for shifting the country to move to producing fresh water through desalination. And the need for reliable and affordable baseload power, diversification away from hydrocarbons, diversification of supplies, and we don't have oil and gas until today. This actually graph shows over the last from 2009, 2016, the big shift in the energy generation modes in the country. In 2009, we're almost 89% dependent on imports from Egypt, cheap gas coming through the gas pipeline. Good days. We were generating electricity at 3 cents per kilowatt hour. Life was very good then. Then there was 7% heavy fuel oil, and then imported electricity. This is from Egypt through electric grid network from Egypt, and renewables were not there. In 2012, the situation drastically changed after the Egyptian revolution. So you could see the the natural gas dropped from 89% to 17%. And then it kept on dropping in 2015 to 6%. For two reasons. One was continuous attack on the Egyptian gas pipeline coming into Jordan. So I was a minister then. You don't know when the attack is coming. How would you plan your maintenance? Overnight, you have to switch from gas suddenly to heavy fuel oil. It was a big mess. in operation. It was a big mess in cash flow, no plans. And you could see this kept on going down. And the other reason, what Bruno said in his present. In Egypt, actually, somehow, and because when I was negotiating with the Egyptian government, after the revolution, the Egyptian government basically had to respond to very strong popular basically demand that the Egyptian gas has to be used in Egypt, and the Egyptian industry should have the first priority for the use of Egyptian gas. And now the Egyptian government actually is selling the gas almost subsidized to factories. That's why they have a big cash flow problem. They are not exporting to get cash flow. It's basically internal consumption, and it's mainly subsidized. And to be frank, the market, you know, they lost markets in Spain, maybe who knows, in Italy, in Jordan. We were relying totally on Egyptian gas. Anyhow, so for these reasons, the demand of the import of Egyptian gas in Jordan went down. We were totally relying on basically heavy fuel oil and also diesel. Very, very expensive to produce electricity. And we still imported 5% through the network from Egypt. 2015, things started improving with the operation of the gas terminal in Aqaba, the LNG, liquefied natural gas terminal. We started to import LNG. So definitely LNG was not as cheap as natural gas. It was double, but still almost half the price of produced electricity using heavy fuel or diesel. So LNG started replacing heavy fuel oil, 40% basically liquefied natural gas. The rest of the mix is basically heavy fuel oil and diesel. 2016, things much better, but you still see that the Egyptian gas still went down because Egyptians didn't want to export gas because of the internal request to keep the supplies inside Egypt. And 87% is LNG. I do expect in 2017 maybe this will go to 90%. But still, for us as a country, even with LNG, life is better, but still we are still dependent on big imports from outside. What were the consequences of this? In the year 2010, we made losses of $226 million over that year because we lost the Egyptian gas. The year before, actually, we were making some profit because of the supply. These are the losses incurred by our national electric power company. 2011, the company incurred $1.4 billion. 2012, $1.6 billion. 2013, $1.5 billion. 2014, $1.6. So you see accumulated that probably of around, $7 billion accumulated with 2015. So that was really bad. And the company, our national electric power company, has not recovered. It's still on its books carries a debt of $7 billion, and the government had to intervene and give a sovereign guarantee for this national electric power company. Otherwise, it should have been dissolved. But the option was to do electricity shedding for the citizens or to keep on incurring heavy losses. Now, 2016, things started improving because of the bigger portion that LNG took from the electricity mix, and the company made some profits. So this is the situation where it is. And indeed, the country, as far as energy, is really not living good days. But we expect that with more reliance on LNG, that the situation would improve. However, they have to still pay back the $7 billion debt they accumulated over 5 years. This shows aside from the demand for water desalination, this shows that the demand for electricity grows at 6% per annum. By the year 2030, the country needs around 6.8 gigawatts of new generation capacity because many of the existing power stations will be out in terms of the lifetime of these plants will be out. So the options for the country, natural gas is not there, but we have switched to LNG, it's still important. Renewable technologies, the country is pushing forward renewable technologies, wind and solar, giving tax incentives, free land, giving all sorts of incentives to the private sector. But as we know, renewable till today, they cannot be base load, and you still have a limited capacity for storage. Oil shale was another good option for the country. We have billions of tons of reserves of oil shale, but the technology still is not developed yet to extract oil from oil shale at commercial prices. However, the government and the Minister of Energy opted to produce electricity from direct burning of oil shale. Environmentally, this is not very friendly, but however, a choice, they have to basically weigh cost-benefit analysis. An agreement has been signed with a consortium of Estonian, Malaysian, and Chinese companies to produce 450 megawatt as the first project to produce electricity from oil shale in Jordan. So coming to nuclear, we have been entrusted in the Jordan Atomic Energy Commission to promote nuclear in Jordan and to work at producing electricity from nuclear power plants. Basically, our program has three major components. At the end of the day, we want to produce electricity from nuclear power plants, but to do that, we have launched two projects in parallel: uranium exploration, because we have the uranium deposits in Jordan, and definitely building human capacity in order to train them and qualify them to be able to operate the future nuclear power plant safely. On the uranium project, our national Jordanian uranium mining company has been exploring Jordanian, desert. We know that Jordan had big amounts of uranium in phosphate deposits, but in addition to that, there are uranium deposits in carbonate rocks. So out of the work that was done since 2008, when we launched officially our nuclear program, in 2014, we published our first joint ore reserves compliant report 2014, which is in compliance with the Australasian codes, Australia and Asian codes of mining. And in 2016, we did a first revision of this code, where we have increased resources and also raised the classification of resources from inferred to indicated. Basically, these are areas. Actually, they are around, this area is around probably 40 kilometers from us here, east of us, facing us, in the central Jordan area. And it extends over a region of around 500 square kilometers. The uranium deposits in this area, central Jordan, are superficial. They spread from 0 meters to 25 meters. They are very easy to mine. They are all at the surface. However, they are low-grade deposits. They are not high-grade. The grade ranges on average from around 175 at the surface to around 125 in the deeper layers. So we have in 2016 published the revised JORC report. In central Jordan area, we have now classified 39,300 tons of yellow cake, U3O8, in that area. 8.1 kilotons have been classified as indicated, with an uncertainty of plus or minus 5%, and 31,200 tons with an uncertainty of plus or minus 10%. with a total of 39, and the work is still continuing to add in more resources and to raise the level of certainty of these resources, going from inferred to indicated and now to measured, meeting the mining standards. Now, just for to give you an idea, in Jordan, if we build 2 gigawatt plants, 2,000 megawatts, we estimate our natural consumption from yellow cake will be around 400 tons. So these 40,000 tons in the central Jordan area will be sufficient to power our plants for at least 90 to 100 years. However, I should mention there are other areas in Jordan that do have uranium. We expect to have similar quantities in other areas close to that area, central Jordan. So we expect to have at least an additional 40 to 50,000 tons. And another option is to extract uranium from phosphates, from phosphate rocks, where the technology is there. It's developed in the United States and other countries, although it's more expensive. But in case you need to go for that process to feed your strategic supplies of uranium, this option is still available. So in parallel to adding more resources and discovering more uranium resources, our teams have worked on the extraction. We have built a pilot plant for extracting uranium from the ore deposit. You could see here, actually, a sample is collected. You could see it from the surface, actually. It's 0 to 2 meters here from the surface. We're extracting this ore from the surface. And we have built a pilot here in the field. These are around 9-meter columns. And the technology we are using is heap leaching, alkali heap leaching, because this is a carbonate rock. The test in the labs proved that alkali heap leaching, basically leaching the ore after grinding it with sodium bicarbonate, would be the most economical option to follow. So here, these are the 6 columns, 3 of them shown here, where we have succeeded after we treated the pregnant solution to extract yellow cake from the deposit. So by the October of last year, we were able to extract, we processed around 6 tons of deposit, where we are able to extract 1 kilogram of uranium. The reason you need to process big quantities is because the grade average is around 150 parts per million. So we need to process big amounts of ore in order to extract the needed quantities. So on average, to produce, you need to produce 2 tons of yellow cake, you have to process 20,000 tons of ore to produce 2 tons. Now we are moving towards a semi-industrial plant. We are building the ion exchange units and recovery areas. This year we are actually building, going from the columns to boxes. We have built 3 boxes. They will treat 150 tons of uranium, and we expect to produce around 15 kilograms of ore this year. So we are moving in steps very cautiously in order to really map all the parameters before we move into full-scale industrial production. Our aim is to produce this yellow cake at the most economical prices, at the lowest price. So we want to optimize the industrial process to produce this yellow cake at the lowest cost, because uranium prices have been fluctuating in the market widely up and down, from $130 per pound in around 2007 to less than $30 nowadays. So big fluctuations, and we are now working on cutting down the cost and optimizing the extraction process so that we could extract the yellow cake at the lowest cost in order even to compete commercially in the market. Mind you, but still, for us, this will still be a strategic source that will meet the needs of our nuclear power plants, even if we extract it at break-even, produce it at break-even, or even at a minor loss. Still, with 40,000 tons feeding our needs. This will be an import substitution. We currently, to produce 2 gigawatts of electricity, if I talk about heavy fuel oil, we were importing 5 million tons of heavy fuel oil and diesel, costing us 2 billion. Replacing them with 400 tons of yellow cake will definitely, even if you produce them at minor loss of 5 or 10 million, and burning them in your nuclear power plants will be a good feasible solution for the country. So now we will continue with the exploration and resource estimation in the future, and reclassifying resources from inferred to indicated, indicated to measured. We will continue adding resources. We will construct a pilot plant, which I have shown in 2017, treat 150 tons. And we are working now environmental impact assessment study, water study, mining plan, and we expect to have the full bankable feasibility study before 2020, before we start full production. So this is the first component of the project. Now the other one is HRD, human resource development, because at the end of the day, as Dr. Bruno have said, nuclear power sometimes is there is a conception that it's a dangerous technology, it's not safe. You really have to have a competent and qualified team to really run your plants. So for this purpose, we have built a research reactor, a 5 megawatt research reactor at the campus of Jordan University of Science Technology. This reactor was commissioned December of last year, and it's now ready to go into full operation by the end of the summer. It's a multi-purpose reactor. It's a 5 megawatt multi-purpose reactor that will be used to produce radioisotopes for nuclear medicine departments at hospitals, both civilian and military hospitals, in addition to using it as the main training hub for students and engineers at the university. The reactor is a 5 megawatt with a maximum neutron flux of 1.5 times 10 to the 14 neutrons per centimeter square per second, with 18 fuel assemblies. The moderator is and coolant is light water, and we have a beryllium heavy water reflector. As I've said, it's a multi-purpose reactor that will basically be used for producing radioisotopes, neutron activation analysis, neutron transmutation doping, and also training, research, and education. This is a side view of the reactor. This is the reactor pool with the reactor core sitting inside it, and this is side view of the service pool. A top view of the reactor core showing 4 beam ports in the future that will be built around the reactor core, and this is a thermal column which will be used to irradiate big targets. This is a photo of the fuel assembly used. Actually, the fuel assemblies came and were imported from Areva, Circa, Areva. They came. This is 19.75% enriched fuel that reached Jordan in April of 2016 and was loaded into the reactor. A photo inside the main control room. Now we have qualified 12 Jordanian reactor operators and 12 senior reactor operators after we took over the reactor from the Koreans, and they are the ones who are operating the reactor. We have undertaken commissioning tests over last year, almost from April till December. We were doing commissioning tests. All design features have been reached in terms of negative thermal power coefficient, meaning that the reactor is stable, and this is now a new requirement for regulators. The reactor stabilizes following control rods withdrawal, complete withdrawal, and basically we have exceeded the design requirement for the neutron flux. Actually, from 1.5, we have reached 1.75, and also passive cooling after the event in Fukushima. Even for small reactors, you have to look at aspects related to passive cooling. In other words, the reactor is able to cool down if you have a complete loss of power. So while at 5 megawatt, for 2 weeks, electric power was disconnected, meaning you lost all your electric power on site, and the reactor immediately shut down. Decay heat was removed inherently through passive cooling, with the fuel integrity confirmed. In addition to that, we tested the reactor to produce the isotopes. At the beginning, iodine-131 for hospitals, iridium-192, and molybdenum technetium. And according to the design requirements, all these 3 isotopes were successfully produced. So currently, we are in the final phases of doing calculations to basically check the experimental measurements, and we have good agreements between the calculations using the sophisticated computer codes and the measurements done, and they are good. And we expect to have the full operational license from the regulator by the end of the summer, where we will start producing radioisotopes for the hospitals. It's not, can you please, yeah. Okay, as I've said, the radioisotope production is one of the main elements. Neutron activation analysis is also another. And in the future, we will build 4 beam lines, one for cold neutrons, one for neutron scattering, neutron radiography, and we will use the reactor for neutron transmutation doping, particularly silicon doping. We expect this reactor to have really good industrial use. I'll come now in the last few minutes to all of this is to basically meet the needs of the infrastructure needed to operate the nuclear power plant. We are currently planning to build 2 plants, each 1,000 megawatt. So when the plants are operational in 2025, 2026, they will supply about 40% of Jordan's electricity needs. This will give us a competitive and stable electricity price, reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels, and I have said replace fossil fuels, whether gas or oil, by uranium coming from Jordan. So we will be able to substitute 5 million tons of LNG or oil or diesel or heavy fuel oil by yellow cake coming from Jordan. And definitely it will lead to the industrial development in the country. Currently, we are targeting that the first plants to be built, we have to have 20% local content. In addition, these 2 units will basically create around 8,000 to 10,000 jobs during construction and around 2,500 jobs during operation. So JAEC was the main initiator, incubator for the NPP project. Currently now we have the Jordan Nuclear Power Company, which basically is the owner of the nuclear power plant project. And in the future, this company will be supervising the construction of the nuclear power plant and its operation in the future. Currently, after we did a competitive bidding, receiving several bids from international NPP suppliers, including Canadian Candu Reactor, Korean Reactors, Areva Reactors, and the Russians, we decided to opt for the Russian reactor, the VVR-1000, and Rosatom is a strategic partner where we have to agree, where we agreed on a 50 plus, 50 minus share for both Jordan and Rosatom. So we are currently now working with Rosatom as a strategic partner and the co-owner of the plant in order to take the investment decision. We have worked over the last 3 years with Rosatom on the siting, cooling water needs for the plants, on the electricity market research, electricity grid, and this year the decision to invest is supposed to be taken based on the competitiveness of the price of electricity that will come out from the proposals that we have. So We are almost at the end of the pre-investment phase, where we have finished more of the studies, site characterization, environmental impact assessment. We are now in the final phases of working the bankable feasibility study, which will come up with the exact price of electricity and the cost of capital. And we are working now with Rosatom on securing the financing of the project. So the investment decision is supposed to be taken by the end of this year, and if it is taken by both co-owners of the project, the construction is expected to start in 2018. So currently we have finished cooling system optimization. As you know, Jordan is a landlocked country. We cannot build this in the Gulf of Aqaba because it's a Gulf area and also it's seismic. So we have opted to move inland. Inland, we moved into the northeast of the capital, around 100 kilometers, a desert area which has no population around it, but still no water. So we have to go to dry cooling. And where we want to get the water from, there is basically, I don't have, because of the time limit, I didn't show it. It's a landlocked area. We have a wastewater treatment plant where we will transport water through a pipeline of around 60 kilometers from the wastewater treatment plant to the NPP site and use the treated water to cool the plant through a closed-loop cycle cooling. This is a model, actually, which was proven in the United States of America, in Palo Verde. They have 4 nuclear power plants that have been operating for almost now 30 years. They use treated wastewater from Palo Verde, where they transport it to the site of the nuclear power plants and produce electricity. They have been producing electricity at very competitive prices over the last 30 years. This is the model we have adopted. We will consume around 25 million cubic meters per annum to cool 1,000 megawatt, compared to an open loop where you circulate 2 billion cubic meters per annum in the steam generators. However, we will lose efficiency. We will lose 2 to 3% efficiency due to the closed loop cycle. However, we have to live with that because the other options are not available for us. So currently, we have finished all these studies, and we are waiting to take the investment decision. We will present these to the government. Rosatom will present the results of the studies to their board, and if the results seem to be positive for both sides, investment decision will be taken. I will close now because Alain Bouga will talk about the immense small modular reactors. I want to tell you that we are actually very interested in the SMRs. They are new technologies, but these SMRs actually offer a lot of benefits to Jordan, because SMRs can be used to desalinate water. And because they are sometimes built underground, they can stand high seismicity. So we are looking seriously at SMRs. And a month ago, we have signed a trilateral agreement with the Koreans, KEPCO, Korean Electric Power Company, and the Saudi King Abdullah City for atomic and renewable energy to explore deployment of SMRs in Jordan. The Koreans have a smart reactor, and we signed an agreement to just look at the feasibility of deploying SMRs in Jordan for electricity production and water desalination. So we are definitely pursuing SMRs because we believe that we can cut down on the use of water for cooling. They can stand high seismicity. They can be built on a local grid. As Bruno said, you don't have to go for big volumes, so you can build them in localities or to feed the needs of small cities or villages. And you don't need to have big amounts of water to cool the reactor. So there are major benefits for the SMRs for Jordan. Mind you, also on the financial capital, rather than basically soliciting 10 billion, for example, we are talking about 10 billion to build the 2 reactors. the 2 gigawatt reactors. Here you talk about 2 billion or 1.5 billion to deploy 2 SMRs, each of 100 megawatt. So they are much easier in terms of more or less capital investment, and they still have the long design half-life. So there are definitely technical challenges where still none of the suppliers or technology developers have licensed an SMR or built. So as more or less a country that is embarking on nuclear energy, we cannot and we will not build an SMR until it's licensed in its country of origin and construction began in the country of origin or in another country. So with SMRs, for example, we as an emerging nuclear country, we will never be embarking on constructing first-of-a-kind reactor. So there are still challenges related to SMRs, particularly licensing from regulators in the countries of origin. The timeline, from what we hear, is by 2020 we should have the first SMR licensed and being constructed, and maybe Alain Bouga can give more details about SMRs in France and globally. Thank you all. Any questions before we give? Yes.
Any reactor has to stop for maintenance. Yeah. So are you planning to have only one reactor or 2 tranches for the same amount, or do you plan to have the small and medium reactor in order to cope with the interruption?
That's a good question, because you said actually when the reactor stops for maintenance, for example, I know the French reactors go for 18 months fuel cycle. You stop them for 45 days. Then you lose a big 1,000 in our case. So that's why at the beginning we said we will build 2 plants. So one is not working, the other one. But there is maybe the issue of the spinning reserve. You really have to have a spinning reserve on your grid, which will be allowed to replace the vacuum you create when you stop the reactor. For Jordan, the electricity grid market study is for that reason. And we have done this study actually a few years ago. For Jordan, whether you have 2 reactors or 1 reactor, the only way to maintain the stability of the grid is to increase the connectivity to Egypt. Because Egypt will be building 4 nuclear power plants, so you need a big volume, shoulder, to hold you once your plant, even with spinning reserves on smaller unit. There is a danger that, if something trips, that you sink the whole basically grid and the country goes into darkness. So for the reactors to be deployed in Jordan, we have to enhance the connectivity to Egypt. Now we have a connectivity of 500 megawatt. We have to enhance it to 1,000 megawatt. For maintenance, it's okay, but if it is not for maintenance, in case the reactor trips, you need somebody to really balance the grid. That's why the connectivity is the issue. So what you said is true, Robert, is that you will rely on the other reactors to keep the balance in your grid. But the grid study should give us that, and before the reactor goes into operation, all the recommendations on all of the requirements to maintain grid stability should be done before you put your reactor to the grid. There was a question here, please.
Yes. Is there a consensus for this option?
That's a good question. I can tell you actually a recent study done by the Jordan Center for Strategic Studies. Now, when we started in 2008, there was a good consensus. Actually, the majority were happy and the country is going nuclear. When Fukushima hit, this aroused many fears. Parliament, many members of the previous parliament were against it. But however, this subsided after basically, definitely the country realized that we really have a serious energy. And then when the global nuclear prospects became clearer, with France building nuclear power plants, US, China, I know Germany is phasing out, but still globally, Britain. Now we did conduct an opinion poll, independent opinion poll last year, which we didn't do. The results that 72% were in favor, around 20% were solidly against, the 8% were in between, And the main reason for the support was the electricity price, because the electricity price in this country over the last 4 years jumped sharply and will continue to jump if, frankly speaking, we don't have other options. So there were 72% who said they will go for a nuclear power plant construction, and the main reason is for electricity market price hikes. That was the main reason, economic. Yes?
Nuclear power is very capital intensive, and on the other hand, the maintenance costs and the fuel costs are not so much. The fuel cost comes to about 5% of the
Exactly.
kilowatt hour. So the emphasis which you put on producing your own uranium, which is absolutely understandable, the Norwegians have the same problem for political reasons, will not impact significantly the price of the electrical power. On the other hand, there is another concern. It is generally assumed, particularly in France, that you have to have an independent nuclear safety agency. Have you taken any steps to set up this type of agency?
Yes, indeed. We have the Jordanian nuclear regulator. It's independent, and IAEA actually gives missions. They are asking us also to give them more independence after Fukushima, but we have a Jordanian regulator. For example, this research reactor, till today, we are not able to operate it because they didn't give us the license. They asked us to repeat some experiments, to do more calculations, although we inaugurated it in December, but still we have to repeat the experiments and we expect to get the operating. So there is a strong regulator. IAEA actually have conducted many missions on behalf of the regulator to basically look at the safety. But you are right on uranium. It constitutes only 5%. However, it's not just only in the price of electricity, it's import substitution. For example, these 400 tons will replace 5 million tons, $2 billion cash flow out to the country. So it will maintain the cash flow in the country. This is one. Secondly, you will create an industry, jobs, people, local community, because this has been sitting there for thousands of years. You create jobs for people. It's part of the basically development. But definitely import substitution. It will substitute you for $2 billion a year in terms of material cash going to import fuel material from outside. I think there was a question from John.
Yeah, how much of a concern would be terrorist attacks on the plant?
Well, this is a good question. We definitely are taking this into account because these are sensitive facilities. So this issue is definitely taken very seriously. One of the reasons for SMRs, I know some designs, I saw some American designs, is that they are totally built underground, so they can stand high seismicity, and also they are very secure. Sometimes they are anonymous. You don't know that you are walking by a reactor. But definitely, yes. But we are actively involved in security, nuclear security. We have signed an agreement with France on nuclear security, CER, and the French government to support us. We have signed agreements with the US government, and the US government has a very active program to build nuclear security in the country, whether through the armed forces or gendarmerie or the intelligence. But definitely security is very, very crucial. And I think we had a strong cooperation with France on this matter. And we are part of the global nuclear security basically network, working with more nuclear countries based on the experience in France, US, UK, Japan, Korea. But yes, these are serious, and we take them into consideration. I think we leave the time now.
No. If I can make a remark. I think that the Jordan program is really a model of nuclear program, and Chairman Toukan is really has taken a leadership, remarkable leadership. Why? Because I think that he did not choose to rely upon foreign competencies. He relies upon foreign competencies, but the building of the capacity, of the human capacity, of the Jordan human capacity is behind what you have shown, behind the extraction fuel, that is to know how fuel cycle works, behind the research reactors, behind, and so I think it's a model of nuclear building capacity, which is not, for example, I don't want to oppose it, but the Emirates has not chosen that model. You see that they have chosen a very immediate approach, but on the long term, I think the Jordan demarche is what we can show as the model. I wanted to insist on that.
Thank you. Well, my point about the percentage of nuclear, which is 40% in 2025. When you decide this percentage, this is because of how much the company will produce, or comparing with the prices. It will be cheaper than liquidated gas or natural gas, or how you decide this number?
Actually, the 40% comes from the volume, because 2,000 megawatt will be out of 5,000. But definitely countries like France, which is now 75% nuclear, the electricity there is very cheap. You know, all these lights in Élysée and these trains are running because of the nuclear electricity. And you know, France, I think, produces, if I'm correct, electricity at what, less than 2 euro cents per kilowatt hour now, because they have depreciated most of the capital invested where these plants have been built in the 70s, early 80s. So nuclear electricity is definitely very competitive, particularly after you depreciate your capital. However, there are definitely issues related to safety, issues related to security, which you have to take care of. I think the last question.
I was just curious, you mentioned that you have a pretty big capacity in terms of shale oil, but you said the technology is not yet refined for that. But we see shale oil being produced globally, you know, in great quantities. So I'm wondering what the problem is there. Yeah. I mean, you know, there's, I don't know, yes, what technologies you're considering or not considering. Or no,
actually, if you allow me, you are probably talking about shale gas in the US. Shale gas is different from shale oil. Shale gas is basically natural gas which sits in pockets here and there. I mean, previously, before they developed this horizontal drilling in the US, that was not economically feasible, because basically, I think our colleague Bruno would know more on this. Previously, you have to hit a big reservoir of gas vertically and extract. But now the US developed some of the, I don't know which companies, where you go horizontal and then you trap these pockets of gas here and there, and then you pump them out. So this is shale gas. When I'm talking about oil shale, it's rock. Rock which has some fuel, basically fossil fuels. It's difficult to extract oil, you know.
My understanding is they're also using horizontal drilling in the U.S. for shale oil, not just for shale gas, so that they develop technology.
Maybe they would know better, yeah.
If I may, there is a confusion, you know, between shale oil and oil shale. If I'm not wrong, you know, your technology you use is used only in Estonia.
Estonia, yes.
They burn rocks, you know, directly rocks. And then it's much more similar to bad coal than to anything related to oil, you know. This is a misleading name of shale oil.
Just to add on this subject, oil shale is not oil, in fact. It's kerosene. It's not mature, so you have to use chemical process, pyrolysis, to get a commercial fuel. If you use for electricity, you can accept a lower quality, which make it rational for Jordan. But if you wanted to use for transportation in Estonia, you need a long process of on the surface to transform kerosene to oil products. Shale oil is oil, difficult to extract, but in Bacon or in the Permian basin, if you have put the shale oil on the surface, you can already put in the refinery. It's a difference Bruno was mentioning.
To Alain to talk about the immersed small modular reactor.